The stage is set in a bustling television studio, the air thick with anticipation. Two debaters, Alex Harper and Jamie Lynn, face each other across a polished table, their notes stacked neatly, their expressions a mix of determination and focus. The topic: are Trump's tariffs on China, Russia, and the BRICS nations a genius move or a global disaster for America? The audience, both in the studio and watching at home, leans in, eager for a clash of ideas on one of the most polarizing economic policies of 2025. Moderator Sarah Nguyen, a seasoned journalist with a knack for keeping debates on track, steps forward to introduce the event. "Good evening, everyone," Sarah begins, her voice steady and commanding. "Tonight, we dive into a critical issue shaping global economics and American policy, President Donald Trump's tariffs, particularly those targeting China, Russia, and the expanded BRICS bloc. Are these tariffs a bold strategy to strengthen America's economy, or are they a reckless gamble that risks global trade and prosperity?" Arguing in favor of the tariffs as a win for America is Alex Harper, an economist and policy analyst with a background in trade advocacy. Opposing the tariffs, arguing they're a loss for America, is Jamie Lynn, a professor of international relations and global economics. Let's get started. The audience applauds as Alex and Jamie nod respectfully, ready to spar. Sarah lays out the rules: each debater will have an opening statement, followed by rounds of arguments, rebuttals, and audience questions, with a strict time limit to keep things sharp. The debate promises to be a deep dive into economics, geopolitics, and the future of America's role in the world. Opening statements. Alex Harper, tariffs as a win for America. Alex adjusts his glasses, his posture confident as he leans into the microphone. "Thank you, Sarah, and good evening." President Trump's tariffs on China, Russia, and the BRICS nations are not just a policy, they're a strategic masterstroke. For too long, America has played the nice guy in global trade, allowing countries like China to exploit our markets with cheap goods, intellectual property theft, and unfair trade practices. These tariffs, including the additional 10% levy on nations aligning with BRICS' so-called anti-American policies, are a wake-up call. They protect American workers, revive our manufacturing base, and reassert our economic dominance. Let's look at the numbers. Since Trump's tariffs began, particularly the partial deal with China reducing their tariffs on U.S. goods from 125% to 10%, we've seen a surge in domestic manufacturing jobs. The U.S. has struck trade deals with the UK and Vietnam, and Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent noted just last week that his inbox was flooded with new trade proposals from countries eager to avoid tariffs. This is leverage in action. America dictating terms, not begging for scraps. The BRICS bloc, with its talk of de-dollarization and alternative currencies, threatens the U.S. dollar's global dominance. Trump's 100% tariff threat if they pursue a rival currency sends a clear message: mess with the dollar, and you lose access to the world's largest market. Critics will cry, trade war, but this isn't war, it's negotiation from strength. Tariffs are bringing jobs back, forcing fairer trade deals, and ensuring America's economic sovereignty. This is a win, plain and simple. Jamie Lynn, tariffs as a loss for America. Jamie, poised and articulate, takes a deep breath before responding. "Thank you, Sarah." Alex, your optimism is inspiring, but it's built on shaky ground. Trump's tariffs are not a genius move, they're a reckless escalation that risks plunging America into economic chaos and alienating our allies. Let's be clear, tariffs are taxes, and American consumers and businesses bear the brunt. The Peterson Institute for International Economics projects that a 100% tariff on BRICS nations would slash U.S. GDP by $432 billion by the end of Trump's term, with inflation rising 1.6%. That's not a win, it's a self-inflicted wound. The BRICS bloc, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and new members like Indonesia and Iran, represents over 40% of global GDP and half the world's population. Slapping tariffs on them doesn't just hurt their economies, it disrupts global supply chains, raises prices for American families, and invites retaliation. China, for instance, has already shown it can retaliate with non-tariff measures, like restricting critical mineral exports. And let's not forget Canada and Mexico, hit with 25% tariffs despite being our closest trade partners. Even Japan and South Korea, key allies, face threats of 25 to 40% tariffs. This isn't leverage, it's diplomatic arson. Trump's obsession with the dollar's dominance ignores reality. The BRICS aren't close to replacing the dollar, their internal rifts, like those between India and China, make a common currency a pipe dream. Yet, his threats push these nations to deepen trade among themselves, reducing reliance on the U.S. market. That's not strength, it's isolation. These tariffs risk higher prices, slower growth, and a fractured global economy. America deserves better. Economic impact on America. Alex's argument. Alex leans forward, his voice brimming with conviction. Let's talk economics. The U.S. economy has been bleeding for decades under lopsided trade deals. China's been dumping cheap steel, undercutting American producers, while Russia and others exploit our open markets. Trump's tariffs, 30% on Chinese imports, 10% on BRICS-aligned nations, are a corrective force. They've already spurred growth in American manufacturing. Since January 2025, the U.S. has added 200,000 manufacturing jobs, many in steel and tech sectors, because tariffs make domestic production competitive again. Look at the partial deal with China. U.S. tariffs dropped from 145% to 30%, and China cut theirs from 125% to 10%. That's a win-win, negotiated from strength. Companies like Walmart may complain about price hikes, but they're already adapting, sourcing more from U.S. suppliers. And the tariff revenue? It's pouring in. Billions to fund infrastructure and reduce the deficit. Stephen Miron, from the White House Council of Economic Advisers, said there's no lasting evidence of significant inflation from tariffs. Job creation is healthy, and the economy is humming. These tariffs are putting America first, and the numbers prove it. Jamie's rebuttal. Jamie shakes her head, her tone measured but firm. Alex, your numbers are selective, and your optimism glosses over real pain. Yes, some manufacturing jobs have returned, but at what cost? The Peterson Institute's G-cubed model shows that 100% tariffs on BRICS would tank U.S. GDP growth and spike inflation. Even the 10% BRICS tariff Trump announced on July 6, 2025, has markets jittery. Global stocks lost trillions in 48 hours after his April tariff threats. That's not stability, it's chaos. You mentioned the China deal, but it's a band-aid on a broken system. China is still restricting critical minerals, and their retaliation could escalate if Trump pushes harder. Meanwhile, American consumers are paying more. Walmart and others have already raised prices on everything from toys to soybeans. Energy and housing costs are driving inflation, and tariffs on basic goods are making it worse. The Congressional Budget Office estimates that Trump's tariffs could add 0.5% to consumer prices annually. That hits the middle class hardest, hardly America first. And the revenue? It's a drop in the bucket compared to the economic damage. This isn't winning, it's gambling with America's prosperity. Alex's counter. Jamie, you're fearmongering, Alex retorts, his voice sharp. The Peterson Institute's projections assume worst-case scenarios and ignore retaliation's flip side, countries caving to U.S. pressure. Look at Treasury Secretary Bessent's comments on July 7, countries are scrambling to negotiate deals to avoid tariffs. That's power. Inflation fears are overblown, Miron's right, there's no significant spike yet. And consumers? They'll adjust, just like they did during Trump's first term. The long-term gain, reshoring industries, securing supply chains, far outweighs short-term price hikes. You can't build a strong economy without some pain. Jamie's counter. Pain for who, Alex? Jamie shoots back. The middle class, small businesses, farmers, they're not abstract numbers. They're paying for this experiment. Your power is pushing allies like Canada and Japan away, forcing them to trade more with BRICS. That's not leverage, it's losing influence. And Besant's inbox of deals? Most are half-baked proposals from desperate nations. The UK and Vietnam deals are outliers, and even the UK's stuck on steel tariffs. You're betting on short-term wins while ignoring long-term isolation. Geopolitical implications. Jamie's argument. Jamie shifts gears, her voice steady but urgent. Let's zoom out to the global stage. Trump's tariffs aren't just economic, they're geopolitical dynamite. The BRICS summit in Rio on July 6, 2025, showed a bloc representing half the world's population pushing back against U.S. hegemony. Trump's 10% tariff threat, announced the same day, was a direct response to their criticism of U.S. tariffs and strikes on Iran. But this bully tactic backfired. Brazil's President Lula called it reckless, saying the world doesn't need an emperor. South Africa's Cyril Ramaphosa called for appreciating various centers of power. Even China, hardly a friend, emphasized BRICS' cooperative, non-confrontational stance. These tariffs alienate allies and embolden rivals. India and the UAE, U.S. partners, are BRICS members. Threatening them with tariff strains those relationships. Meanwhile, China and Russia are pushing de-dollarization, trading in yuan and rubles. Trump's threats make that more appealing, not less. The new development bank and BRICS payment systems, while nascent, are gaining traction. By isolating BRICS, Trump's pushing them to deepen ties, like China and Brazil's talks on a tropical forests forever facility. This isn't strength, it's driving the global south away from the US, risking our geopolitical influence. Alex's rebuttal. Jamie, you're giving BRICS too much credit, Alex counters, his tone dismissive. This bloc is a mess, India and China can't even agree on a border, let alone a currency. The new development bank? It's loaned $39 billion compared to the World Bank's trillion plus. The dollarization is a fantasy, the dollar accounts for 58% of global reserves, per the IMF. Trump's tariffs are a wake-up call to BRICS, don't bite the hand that feeds you. The US market is their golden goose, 100% tariffs for a rival currency would lock them out. That's why countries are negotiating, not rebelling. Geopolitically, tariffs strengthen our hand. Look at Russia, trade's down 90% since Ukraine. Tariffs on them are symbolic but send a message. Align with anti-American policies, and you're cut off. China's feeling the heat too, their partial deal shows they're bending. Lula's posturing, but Brazil's economy depends on US trade. This is classic Trump, disrupt, negotiate, win. The world respects strength, not hand-wringing about emperors. Jamie's counter. Alex, you're missing the forest for the trees, Jamie replies, her eyes narrowing. BRICS' internal rifts don't make them weak, they make them unpredictable. Pushing them into a corner accelerates their push for alternatives, like yuan-based trade. India may be a US partner, but it's buying Russian oil in rubles and yuan. That's not bending to US will, it's diversifying away. And your golden goose argument? The US market is huge, but BRICS nations are growing, 40% of global GDP. If they trade more among themselves, we lose leverage. Trump's tariffs are burning bridges, not building them. Alex's counter. Burning bridges? Alex scoffs. We're setting boundaries. BRICS nations want our market, our tech, our investment. Tariffs force them to play by our rules. Russia's economy is a shadow of itself, sanctions and tariffs keep it that way. China's deal proves they'll compromise. Lula can talk tough, but Brazil's not ditching the US for China. Strength wins respect, and Trump's delivering it. Long-term consequences. Alex's argument. Long-term, these tariffs secure America's future, Alex says, his voice steady. We're bringing supply chains home, reducing reliance on hostile nations like China for critical goods, think semiconductors, pharmaceuticals. The CHIPS Act and tariffs are rebuilding our tech sector. By 2030, the U.S. could lead in chip production again, thanks to tariffs making foreign imports less competitive. And the dollar? It's untouchable. BRICS currency dreams are stalled. Putin himself said it's not time for a common currency. Tariffs ensure that stays true. Global trade will adapt. Countries are already lining up for deals. Bessant's busy couple of days proves it. The U.S. economy will be more self-sufficient, our workers better paid, our industries stronger. Short-term pain for long-term gain, that's the Trump strategy, and it's worked before. His first term saw record low unemployment and booming markets before COVID. Tariffs are the path to a resilient, dominant America. Jamie's argument. Alex, your vision of a self-sufficient America sounds nice, but it's a fantasy, Jamie counters, her tone sharp. Long-term, these tariffs risk isolating us. The global economy thrives on interdependence, not walls. By 2030, BRICS nations could account for 50% of global GDP, per current growth trends. If they deepen trade among themselves, China's already pushing yuan-based deals with Brazil and India, we lose market share. The dollar's dominance isn't eternal, its share of reserves dropped from 71% in 2000 to 58% today. Tariffs accelerate that slide by making the U.S. seem coercive, as Brad Setzer from the Council on Foreign Relations warned. Supply chains. Reshoring sounds great, but it's costly and slow. Semiconductors take years to scale, and tariffs raise input costs for U.S. manufacturers. The CHIPS Act helps, but it's not a tariff-driven miracle. Meanwhile, consumers face higher prices, and allies like Japan and South Korea, slapped with tariffs, invest less in the U.S. Manu Bhaskaran from Centennial Asia Advisors asked, is this how the U.S. treats its friends? Long-term, we're pushing the world toward a multipolar order where America's influence wanes. That's not resilience, it's decline. Alex's rebuttal. Jamie, you're betting on a multipolar world that doesn't exist yet, Alex says, his voice rising. The dollar's still king, 58% of reserves is still triple the euro's share. BRICS growth is real, but their disunity cripples them. Tariffs force them to need us more, not less. Reshoring is happening, Intel's new Ohio plant, TSMC's Arizona facility. Costs are high, but so's the payoff, jobs, security, independence. Consumers will adapt, they always do. Trump's tariffs are a bold bet on America's future, not a retreat. Jamie's rebuttal. Bold bets can bankrupt you, Alex, Jamie replies. Intel and TSMC's plants are great, but they're years from full capacity, and tariffs raise their costs too. The dollar's strong, but coercion breeds resentment. Setzer's right, making the dollar a favor to the U.S. weakens its appeal. BRICS may be messy, but they're not stupid. They're building alternatives, and tariffs are speeding that up. Long term, we're not leading, we're losing ground. Audience questions. Sarah turns to the audience, selecting a question from a small business owner. How do tariffs affect my costs and ability to compete globally? Jamie jumps in. Great question. Tariffs raise the cost of imported materials, think steel, electronics components. For a small business, that means higher production costs, forcing you to raise prices or cut margins. If you export, retaliatory tariffs from BRICS or allies like Canada make your goods less competitive. The National Federation of Independent Business reported that 60% of small businesses faced higher costs from Trump's first-term tariffs. This round will hit harder. Alex responds, short-term, yes, costs may rise. But tariffs incentivize sourcing domestically, which stabilizes your supply chain and supports local economies. Over time, as US manufacturing grows, your costs will stabilize, and you'll compete better with foreign firms no longer undercutting you with cheap imports. Another question comes from a student: will tariffs make the US a global outcast? Alex shakes his head. No. The US is the world's largest market, nobody's abandoning us. Tariffs force fair play, and countries are negotiating to stay in our good graces. We're leading, not isolating. Jamie disagrees. Tariffs strain alliances. Japan, South Korea, even the EU are re-evaluating ties. The BRICS summit showed a unified front against US policies.